The new inflation rates have just been announced, and Liam Halligan here with the exact figure. Liam?
Morning. Well, inflation is up only marginally, but it is up. Inflation was 9% in April 2022. That means it was a 9% price increase on average compared to April 2021. In May, it's 9.1%. So no respite, still very, very high inflation. And what's really catching my eye isn't only the consumer price index, which I just cited, which reflects prices in the shops. What's catching my eye, just looking at the ONS database here, the Office for National Statistics, is what economists call the PPI, the Producer Price Index. That shows the costs that businesses are shouldering. The Producer Price Index, Eamonn, in May was 20.9%.
Oh dear. And that has to be passed on somewhere.
It doesn't please me to say it, but the Producer Price Index is a very good indication of where inflation is heading.
Yeah.
I'm not saying inflation headline Consumer Price Index is going to be 20%. It was when we were kids back in the 1970s, of course. I'm not saying it's going to get to that this time around, but at least some of those producer price rises will have to be passed on or businesses will go bust.
The context of all of this, of course, we had the Bank of England last week announcing interest rates. It was perhaps a smaller increase than some people were calling for. Perhaps then, in light of the inflation figures today, that seems proportionate, that we're coping with it in the right way. Would you agree?
I think, for my money, I think that's a generous interpretation to the Bank of England. This 9.1% number, it's still more than 4 times the Bank of England's inflation target. The Bank of England's inflation target is 2%. What's actually happened since last week, Isabel, is for the first time in a while, a proper debate has broken out among those 9 economists who are the Monetary Policy Committee, who determine what interest rates will be. They'd been all buttoned up. There'd been no dissent. People like me were writing in newspaper columns. They were guilty of groupthink and acting too slowly. You've now got a bit of a debate breaking out because there are members of the Monetary Policy Committee who think we should be raising rates faster and further. And if we do that sooner, that means you can get your arms around this inflation. You can push it back down. The authorities are saying double-digit headline inflation will not be tolerated. And if you don't do that quicker, in the end, you've got to raise interest rates for longer.
Does this intervene in any way in the pay negotiations that the rail unions are undergoing at the moment, or do we just know this is going to get higher, so it doesn't really matter?
Well, Network Rail, backed by the government, of course, on one side of the table, can't say, oh, inflation's peaked at 9% because now it's gone up further, and they'll have economists looking at the Producer Price Index too, as I just did. I think it's fair to say, and I've written this in newspapers over recent weeks, I do think inflation will peak quite soon. I don't think the numbers start to drop out, if you like. If something's really expensive one year, by definition, if the numbers come down just a little bit, you get a percentage fall in inflation. But for my money, I don't think we're going back to 2, 3 or 4% inflation anytime soon. I think post-pandemic, there's still many, many issues in global supply chains. I think now people are expecting higher wage rises. We're now used to numbers like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% inflation, which for 20 years we weren't. And that's why it's so hard to squeeze these inflation expectations out of the system, out of pay bargaining, out of the supply chain, out of businesses setting their costs. Any small business owner will know what I'm saying. And that's another reason why, in my view, it's a personal view, but I'm not alone, the Bank of England needs to act faster.
And just a thought about, this argument's being written in lots of the papers about whether or not pensions and indeed benefits should stay in line with CPI, which would see them increase by, say, 10%, whatever inflation may be in the autumn. Some debate about how you can argue that at the same time as saying there should be pay restraint within the public sector.
Think back to that spring statement by Rishi Sunak here on GBNews. The moment he gave his statement, Gloria DePierre and I were presenting, we said that can't stand. And what we were talking about was when the Chancellor said he would uprate benefits from April this year to April next year by just 3.1%. Back then, the government was forecasting 7% inflation. It's now 9%, pushing towards 10%. I think it's politically unsustainable to have benefits going up by only 3.1% when inflation is this high. I do think they're going to have to make a move in the autumn to uprate those benefit payments.
Well, bear in mind those benefit payments are about 180 quid a week. So, these are people who rely on that solely. And I think there's a lot of people won't disagree with what you're saying there. Keep crunching those numbers.